Non-Binary Awareness Day. Have you weebs ever heard of Yuu Watase?
You are into any type of shoujo. You love love stories. Listen, you can't not see her work. You really can't, because it is everywhere, okay?
Oh boy, it's Yuu Watase time.
Lately, I've been revisiting some of my favorite anime-manga properties, specifically within a single creator. As a teen, I mostly gravitated towards battle action, supernatural stories featuring doe-eyed protagonists who smile candidly after completing a nearly impossible task. These glowing characters face numerous challenges impeding their success, but left with a renewed spirit and a deeper sense of self-worth. Maneuvering through various obstacles and developing courage to overcome adversity is presented as the ideal narrative in many stories. But what if I told you there is a manga artist who defied the preconceived expectation surrounding media created by women and femmes? A storyteller who isn't afraid of going dark, dreary, and hopeless, but somehow reinforces the theme that there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. The author who fits these criteria to a T is none other than the iconic legend known as Yuu Watase. It's been a while since I've made a mangaka-centered video. My last one was on Aizawa, which somehow was over 2 years ago. Whether or not you avidly keep up with the authors you consume, you've probably encountered a Yuu Watase series. Many of my high school afternoons were spent indulging in the library manga section and eating up nearly anything Watase ever made. Her works often received widespread recognition for popularizing certain genres like isekai and the variety of subjects tackled, usually aimed at a young female audience. A lot has changed since her most famous works were released, and it's got me pondering a few things. Is Yuu Watase still leading the force of shoujo manga creation, and has her rise within the manga industry revealed certain perceptions of how women and femmes are treated? To answer these questions, we need to go back to the start of Watase's career and examine the evolution of her content from past to present. So let's go back to the beginning. To start, Yuu Watase is a manga artist born in Osaka, Japan. She was immersed in manga creation from the moment she emerged from the womb. At merely 5 years old, Watase put pen to paper and started drawing comics. Soon after, her talents became more ubiquitous and developed a true passion for the craft during high school. But Watase's upbringing and formative childhood years were not wholesome by any means, as she dealt with bullying all throughout elementary school. Later, things started looking up when Watase attended an all-girls middle and high school. There, she focused on herself and didn't bother with frivolous activities such as dating, which is ironic given that she's often equated with romance. As Watase got her feet wet in the manga industry, her notoriety came quite suddenly. When she was 17, she was awarded the Shogakukan Newcomer Award, a contest in which young artists submit their short manga stories. While most of us envision Watase as a major figure within the shoujo manga milieu, it wasn't always this way. Before her fame, Watase was an avid reader of shounen manga and wanted to submit her work in the shounen category. However, since Watase surpassed the required page limit, she submitted her work to shoujo instead. And thank goodness Watase went down this avenue, as that might have been a blessing in disguise. This led Watase to create her first seminal work at 18 called Pajama de Ojama. This was a shoujo manga made in 1989 about a teenage girl named Aogiri who joins her high school judo club to get closer to her crush Isozaki. He is the team captain and is the quintessential heartthrob, and Aogiri does everything in her power to garner his affection. That is until her friend informs her about an old Chinese charm where if you wear the same pajamas and have your crush's photo underneath your pillow, you will awaken in their bed. Unfortunately, the charm sent Aogiri to another guy's bed, Naoki, but as the pair spend time together, they steadily grow in one another. The writing is no Jane Austen and the art is no Picasso, but the sweet, amusing chemistry between two people in precarious situations is heart palpitating. The crust lining the bread of Watase's artistic pursuits started to build afterwards. During the 90s, she expanded the length of her titles from the one-volume tankobons to maximize her outreach. Shinsunuki Miman Okotowari sparked this domino effect as it was Watase's first 3-volume manga series. This was her first foray into the drama genre that revolved around familial death and encounters with estranged people. Similar to the others I've mentioned, there was no official English release, therefore limiting its exposure outside of Japan. Luckily, Viz Media was an absolute badass and scooped up some of Watase's works to combat this conundrum. It's home to most of her series that we will touch on later in this video, but Viz played a major role in why Watase is such a popular name in the States. While Okotowari is regarded as Watase's first major work, I'd say her most groundbreaking introductions would be these two series. Fushigi Yugi, which began serializing in 1991, and Ceres Celestial Legend, which started serializing in 1996. Both of these series were cultural phenomenons, insanely popular, and truly skyrocketed Watase's name into the limelight. Fushigi Yugi just celebrated its 30th year anniversary with a pop-up store in Japan, and Ceres was critically acclaimed, winning the 43rd Shogakukan Manga Award in the shoujo category. With these two particularly, the premises alone were already more attention-grabbing than what Watase had previously. These series, while set in a version of reality, took place in an alternate setting than home and dealt with dystopian themes regarding society. Firstly, we have Fushigi Yugi, which follows two junior high school girls, Miyaka and Yui, as they navigate their academic futures and familial pressures. This changes once the pair enters their school library one day and stumbles across a book called The Universe of the Four Gods. This book is set in ancient China, and once opened, the two are transported to the country of Conan. Upon their arrival, they are met by thugs who deem them to be foreigners and are put in danger as a result. Just in the nick of time, a flashy Bishonen Tamahome appears to save them, and the pair attempt to find solutions to return home. By nature of these circumstances, the chosen one trope rears its head as the Conan Emperor Hotohori declares Miyaka the priestess of Suzaku. Her task is to gather the 7 celestial warriors who, once found, can collectively summon Suzaku, grant Miyaka 3 wishes, and restore the Conan Empire to greatness. Meanwhile, Yui gets transported back home from the book and provides a meta-narrative through intangibly experiencing Miyaka's ventures. Once given the opportunity, Yui enters back into the book and is dead set on finding Miyaka. Initially, Yui's return centers on bringing Miyaka back home with her, but due to jealousy, she is manipulated and becomes the rival priestess of Seryu. From there, the two girls compete directly with one another to get their wishes granted and learn the deeply rooted customs of this world throughout their journey. Because of Fushigi Yugi's overwhelming international popularity, it became a highly influential series. Its popularity created a surge in the guilty pleasure genre of reverse harem and propelled the 90s and 2000s isekai boom. During the series' popularity peak, Watase was frequently invited to anime conventions and expressed how she didn't expect the series to gain significant traction, so humbleness prevails. I also think Watase played a factor into why shoujo isekai during its heyday incorporated historical mythology. Looking at the most famous works reveals that they all have some type of mythological lore, and Watase's utilization of it was no mere coincidence. In an interview with Animerica, she says, "Myths? Well, I've always loved fantasy. I've always wished I could actually experience fantasy worlds and go to such places. That's probably why I write so much about them. I like stories about real life, but if I can incorporate fantasy into real life, I get excited, and it's fun to write about. Miyaka's character is a direct insertion of this mentality. She wants to escape the pressure of having to figure out her entire life and enjoy the present. This rhetoric is synonymous with the majority of protagonists in these stories, i.e., leaving a constricting environment. Above all else, the reverse harem aspect seems to be Fushigi Yugi's primary attraction, with hot anime men plaguing your viewfinder and making you salivate uncontrollably. Shipping wars were an abundant part of the reverse harem package. If you weren't rooting for Miyaka and Tamahome, you were Hotohori stan. If you were a Yui and Tsuboshi apologist, there were also Tetsuya lovers.
Yikes.
The subtle inclusion of queerness, hardcore action, and soap opera drama was enticing enough to get anyone addicted, even though there were caveats with some of these representations that reinforce what era the series was made in. On the opposite side of the whimsical spectrum of Watase's magnum opuses, you had the eerie tale of Ceres, centering on twins Aya and Aki, who on their 16th birthday are brought to their grandfather's house for a seemingly special tradition. This tradition, to their horror, is passed down to the Mikage family to determine members' descendants of spiritual beings. Presented with the relic of a mummified hand, it is revealed that Aya is in possession of the vengeful goddess that cursed them. Aya is the reincarnation of the celestial maiden Ceres, who was forced to marry Aki's counterpart Shiso, who stole her robes, restricting her to reside on Earth. Due to this reveal, Aya received a death sentence from her family and was forced out of the Mikage estate. She ends up staying with a fellow maiden vessel, Suzumi, who has been living with the Aogiris for protection. From there, Aya forges a path to better understand her family's motives while holding Aki captive, and to find Ceres' stolen robes so she can ascend to heaven. Ceres, compared to the rest of Watase's discography, sticks out like a sore thumb. It can only be described as unrelentingly dark. Beneath the surface, though, there were explicit messages conveyed, and it's more reflective of the real world than we might realize. While Ceres is still highly regarded, it's become an extremely divisive series in recent years. Anyone familiar with Watase is well aware of how intense and graphic, polarizing actions are depicted. These are usually enacted for specific purposes to provide insight into patriarchal structures. While Fushigi Yugi did mishandle some scenarios, especially considering the implications Miyaka received if she was defiled, aka Suzaku couldn't be summoned. In retrospect, Ceres is more intentional with these portrayals and doesn't shoehorn or gloss over this aspect. These concerns additionally were heightened by industry professionals where the magazine Ceres ran in, declaring that Shoujo Comic is the #1 dangerous magazine for Japanese children due to the explicit romantic sex scenes. Mind you, there were other magazines that were more extreme with this activity, but Shoujo Comic is where the PTA drew the line. Granted, the PTA did this well after Ceres was made, but it makes me scratch my head a little bit to see titles like these were the ones that were concerning. It's a bit weird. In Ceres, Aya is doomed from the beginning and deemed a threat to her family because of the maiden's curse. The Mikages are a shady and stealthy organization that has placed women under outrageous circumstances. This visual signifier is representative of the people in Aya's life assimilating to the notion that her battle is within herself, essentially stating there's something inherently wrong with her. But rather than focusing solely on Aya, the story envelops her struggles around a worldwide spectrum. This is where Ceres' true underlying messages bubble up. It details the consequences of being a woman in a hegemonic male society. Watase further echoes this sentiment by stating that she wanted to showcase everything negative about men and humanity in general. The character who exhibits this trait most prominently would be Aki's reincarnation Shiso, the progenitor of the Mikage clan. During the latter portion of the series, Shiso wholly transforms Aki and desires to make Ceres his property once again. Aki laments how he's unable to view Aya as just a sister, but also a woman because of this. There's a common through line that these scenarios are incestuous, but from my POV, it's just a man non-consensually assaulting a woman. It's not a Yori and Iku situation where they want to be together. Aya and Aki are both traumatized and suffer immensely because of their circumstances. What's also interesting about the way Watase utilizes power dynamics is the way she crafts Ceres as not entirely a victim. The maiden's objectives are to procreate and reproduce, so they use men's lustful desires for women to their own advantage. The tonal shift to horror and psychological thriller is why Ceres is regarded as Watase's best written work. It carefully weaves through taboo topics, strikes them on their head, and subverts one's expectations of femininity in female-oriented media. By the early 2000s, Watase had become a huge sensation globally. During this time, Watase reverted to more uplifting narratives to alleviate her stress after these mentally taxing topics. Some of these were one-shots, while others were full-fledged titles. Regardless, they were incredibly endearing and heartfelt, and had the intimacy that people craved for a romance series. Imadoki captures the daily tribulations of teenhood, similarly following an enthusiastic girl who aspires to attend a prestigious high school. After barely qualifying to fill a vacant spot at Mayo Academy, Tampopo bumps into a flower boy named Koki, who is growing a plant synonymous with her name. However, everything is not all sunshine and roses, as she quickly realizes that as a commoner, she doesn't fit in with everyone else. To change her initial perception, Tampopo starts a gardening club at her school to make new friends and establish her mark at Mayo. Soon after, her efforts are successful as she attracts new people and they learn how to connect with one another apart from wealth and competition. Alongside Imadoki, you had the AI romance of Absolute Boyfriend, which became a massive hit accompanied by a K-drama. It focuses on a girl named Riko who desires to have a boyfriend. One day, she crosses the path of a salesman named Gaku who directs her to his company's website, Chronos Heaven. This site allows Riko to create her perfect lover and thought it was nothing more than a trivial game. Little does Riko know that Chronos Heaven is no game, and receives a gigantic box at her house that contains a sex toy. Once booted by a kiss, Riko names him Knight Tenjo, and he becomes the epitome of what a girl wants.
Does Squidward take requests? If so, could he play What a Girl Wants?
My pleasure.
However, there is a catch. Riko can only access Knight for 3 days, and afterward, it'll cost her an arm and a leg. Gakko and Riko strike a deal after that period, so long as Knight gathers data on women's dispositions to create future models. All the while, Riko is sworn to secrecy about Knight's true identity, and the love triangle antics that ensue from her childhood friend Soshi. This is what How to Build a Better Boyfriend aspired to be, but failed miserably. It was truly the cornerstone of the high school romance genre, offering lessons about relationships, consent, and dating. It's one of the few series where it's impossible not to get second male lead syndrome, as Watase makes it abundantly clear that Knight is a temporary solution. He will not last forever and will eventually break down. And Riko internalizes her experiences with him, which will remain inside her forever. And what screams internalizing your experiences for the better than a magical girl equivalent? Yes, magical girl, which Watase executed in her fantasy title, Alice 19. It's surprising that this series didn't receive an anime, since all of Watase's adapted material were within the supernatural and fantasy realm. There is no OVA, no ONA, nothing, not a zip. Alice 19th was very popular at the time of its release, sailing on the coattails of Fushigi Yugi and Ceres. The constant feeling of being overshadowed by a sibling was universally relatable, and also got Watase back into utilizing historical mythology. But it wasn't until 2007 that Watase's most resonant series entered the scene. Sakuragari is the first BL title in Watase's repertoire, and is significantly darker than anything she ever created. The subject matter was so intense that Watase speculates that's possibly the reason why it wasn't released in most countries. Part of me also wonders if this was around the time Watase wanted to shift over her content outside of shoujo. As stated before, shoujo magazines were getting axed for presenting explicit themes. Since Sakuragari was a josei, it allowed Watase to showcase the darker realities lying in Japan that she only tapped into in her prior titles. This was also redemption for positive queer representation. No ma'am. That is not positive.
I blame me.
I blame me. I blame me.
Because I thought for a second, surely it's 2024.
This time around, it was direct, vulnerable, and pleasurable. 'Tis a shame that Sakuragari never made it to the States. However, things weren't booming and wholesome for long, as we have reached the end of Watase's infamous works, Arata the Legend. This was her first and probably only shonen title that started running in the magazine Shonen Sunday in 2008. It had received an anime adaptation, with the story recently concluding in November 2023. The reason why Arata is important to mention in this discussion is how it has reshaped fans' perceptions of the manga industry. After wrapping up Sakuragari, Watase felt as though she wanted to make something that wouldn't restrict her creatively and had few limitations. The story of Arata takes all the tropes Watase has used over the years into a culmination of historical adventure isekai madness. During the creation stage, she very quickly realized how different working in shonen was compared to shoujo, not only with the target audience, but specifically the work environment. Unsurprisingly, due to this factor, problems arise. Watase went through hell and back just to get the series published weekly. She described her typical morning as overwhelming and often awakened to headaches after pulling all-nighters to hand in pages of chapters. By her editor's demand, she had to constantly redraw scenes from pivotal arcs of the manga that sometimes didn't align with where the story was headed. Every time Watase civilly addressed Mr. I, the editor, the only response he could muster was, "Draw it exactly the way I tell you."
I don't have an answer for that.
That's the kind of thing that winds up offending me.
Mr. I treated everyone in their department relatively the same. However, one glaring difference is that he wouldn't approve Watase's layouts, resulting her in missing deadlines. Watase also noted how his corrections would be inconsistent, and sometimes would forget things she mentioned, resulting in him cutting crucial details in the manga. Watase further laments that Mr. I was very difficult to deal with, and caused me a lot of stress, especially with Shonen Sunday being a weekly publication. It was pretty much hell. At some point, I was no longer doing it for the sake of the readers, or even for the sake of the manga as a body of work. I was just drawing storyboards and layouts solely to get his approval. Luckily, Mr. I would be parting ways with Watase, and her editor was replaced with someone slightly better. Watase finishes off discussing this situation by explaining how Mr. I thought her audience were imbeciles and they couldn't interpret a story especially if it was subtextual. This situation is particularly upsetting because it suggests that a critically acclaimed manga artist needs to be guided by her editor step by step into making her story. Watase was someone who understood the aspirations to become an artist and how to achieve success in that career. She, by no means, was lacking in experience in creating manga, even if the shonen editors perceive it differently because her previous works were shoujo. This sentiment of treating girls' media as inferior continues to be a pervasive pattern in nerd industries. Look no further than Yumi Tamura stating how male editors stereotype shoujo manga as primarily romance-focused. In an interview with Flowers magazine, she said, "Even male manga editors sometimes look down on shoujo manga. Since my works tend to involve a lot of action, they're often described as going beyond the boundaries of shoujo manga, or not very shoujo manga-like. But each time that happens, I'd respond with, no, that's not how it is, and point out to Hagio sensei's work." She continues, "For me, shoujo manga is a wilderness that Hagio sensei opened up. It was so vast and deep there was no such thing as boundaries. I also read a lot of shonen manga and did not make distinctions between them. The only thing that mattered was whether it was interesting or not, but that's not really how people see it." The assertion that feminine media should be restricted to a box is how we end up with stereotypes that demonize women and femmes' experiences in professional fields. Despite Watase having years of experience under her belt, she was deemed a newbie and someone inadequate to capture a shonen magazine's audience. And sadly, Watase's situation is not an isolated occurrence. Shonen magazines have reportedly treated women unfairly, with male editors asking intrusive questions regarding their personal lives. Shonen Jump even stated at one point that anyone working for them needs to understand the hearts of boys, otherwise they might end up in a predicament similar to Watase. So what does this mean for her moving forward? Well, it's disappointing that within the marketing of Watase's catalog, everything seems to stem back to Fushigi Yugi. From the myriad of her manga referencing it as a tipping point for selling volumes, to fans begging and borderline bullying content creators to cover the series. Yes, that happens. I've been a prodigious victim of this. But if this video isn't proof enough, Watase's works stand up on their own and don't need heavy nostalgia to keep popularity afloat. Watase has moved on. She's continuing working on the Fushigi Yugi sequel after making the prequel, while keeping tabs on her mental health and well-being. As of 2019, Watase came out as ex-gender/non-binary, and she's just a normal person like you and I. For Western audiences, Watase seems to be relegated firmly in nostalgia. But after hearing about what Watase went through with Arata the Legend, I don't blame her for going on hiatuses. Sooner or later, she was gonna reach a breaking point. I feel similarly about Ayazawa, which I spoke about in that video. I feel as though we shouldn't be pressuring these creators to finish off these series if they are not in the health or physical condition to do so. It's just a sad reality that people who are so talented are often exploited by a system who's solely money-driven. Yes. Manga and anime are a business, but it should not come at the cost of someone's health being in jeopardy. But enough with me being a Debbie Downer. Watase is currently celebrating her 35th year anniversary with a large-scale art exhibition in Tokyo. It's happening throughout the entirety of August, with all of Watase's titles making their grand reappearance. So, great timing on posting this on my part. Where Watase's future lies is relatively unknown. I can only speak on things I know myself and what's been uploaded online. However, no matter where her journey meanders, the international impact of her work will continue to resonate with readers and incorporate universal narratives for many years to come. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, you know the drill, and I'll see you guys soon for my next video. Until next time. Did my stomach just rumble? Oh, ew. Okay, that's my sign to leave because I'm hungry. Until next time, bye.